Hi, everyone. My name is Ian Chan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mattermost, and I'm here with Mike DeBonis from Bright Scout, one of our longtime partners, to share the story of a Fortune 500 company that works closely with government that needed collaboration and workflow, and they got it through a Mattermost solution that was really able to adapt at scale to their very specific requirements around network security, around ITAR compliance, around DevOps workflows to make their organizations more productive, working with Jira, working with Jenkins and GitHub and all their different infrastructure pieces, all built on top of an Azure platform with very thoughtful and sophisticated organization of access controls, malware scanning, and a whole bunch of compliance requirements that really needed in order for them to go into full production. So really excited to talk about this theme of high trust collaboration. And we're going to talk about a real world Mattermost deployment at scale.
So as Ian mentioned, this story starts back in 2018 with a Fortune 500 multinational company. And in 2018, executives basically set forth on a sort of a major strategic initiative for them to modernize collaboration. And as part of that strategy, sort of a cornerstone of that strategy was to bring in a new enterprise messaging. At the time, they were using Link. So they wanted to bring in something modern, far more usable, and something that will help them grow through, over the next few years. After a pretty extensive evaluation, they chose Mattermost. Mattermost was really the only platform that met all of their security, performance, usability, and compliance requirements. So that's where the story begins. Today, it's grown to one of the largest Mattermost deployments. There's 20 teams, with about 21,000 channels spread across those teams, 34,000 users. We're up to 3 million posts, about 60,000 files, and we've got about 30 plus different plugins and webhooks and different integrations within the organization. So that's kind of where we are today. But what I was going to do is tell you a little bit about the journey on how we got there, and maybe some of the lessons that we learned along the way. So in the beginning, once the decision was made that Mattermost was going to be their next-gen platform, we needed a place to get started. And there was a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns. While they did an evaluation of Mattermost, there were still a lot of features that they really haven't had a chance to evaluate in a broader audience. And of course, Mattermost is releasing new features every month. So coming from a bit of a software background, I really believe in agile delivery and getting something out and launched, something simple, inviting a small set of users in just to see how people are going to interact with the system, and what the feedback was, and where are the things that we're going to need to deal with as we scale. So we launched a very simple single node instance, invited a small set of users in particular some of the compliance officers, and this was really important given the nature of the organization. They're highly regulated, so having compliance involved early on allowed us to suss out any requirements that we need to take into account as we design the system and as we rolled it out to the larger audience. So over a course of several months, we observed behaviors, gathered questions and feedback, and again, this was invaluable for the team to plan sort of the next phase, to determine how we would configure the system and how we would onboard users. So lots of questions came out of that. And one of the big, I think, realizations for the organization was scaling is not just a technical concern. There's a lot more that goes into deploying a system within a company this size. And we had to address a lot of those in addition to, the technical infrastructure that we would have to deploy. So, some of the questions we had to sort of answer as a team was how will we manage teams and channels? So you've got a large audience. Do you want to allow anyone to create teams and create channels? If you do, how do you manage sort of convention and the way those things are named and discovered? We ended up initially only allowing certain members to create channels and teams, but ultimately, once I think a larger group of folks got more comfortable with the platform, we've opened that up so users can create their own channels now. So that was just a little bit of learning along the way. Onboarding users was another interesting problem to solve. So one thing we knew is that we were going to onboard users in sort of tranches, but as part of that onboarding process, we had to make sure they were assigned to the right teams and have access to the right channels and how we were going to do that. Fortunately, Mattermost had a really good bulk import feature. And so we were able to build upon that and create sort of an internal workflow so that we could take sets of users and then automatically basically import them and do the team and channel assignment as we rolled that out across the organization. Training was another big aspect. So we had to essentially scale up the team as well, put some training materials together, deploy a internal website to allow people to have access to FAQs and other information. And then, on the other side of that was how did we handle support? So again, had to introduce some folks that were responsible for support and created a channel structure and a process around that. I think maybe a lot of us take for granted, how easy Mattermost is to use. But there are folks, in these organizations that this is just a new platform and a new way of communicating. And, they just sometimes need some help. So it was very important, I think, and played a large part in the adoption curve at this organization. And then lastly was, how we manage compliance and compliance risks. So we had to, it was a combination of some training, some policies. We had to introduce terms of service, but we also introduced some features within the platform that would basically set up the controls and checks that the compliance team needs to feel comfortable with the communication, the content that would be shared within the platform. So as the team was sort of working through the operational nature of the deployment, the other half of the team was working through the technical design. And I think one thing that I think at least I've learned, having done a few of these already, was every organization is somewhat unique in their technical requirements and constraints. Similar in many ways, but there's always a few things that are just different, just the way the organization works and the infrastructure that's in place. It was an interesting time at this organization. While they were, on this, this initiative to improve collaboration, they were also moving towards cloud. So they were super early in their adoption of Azure Cloud. And, for us, we were sort of tasked as the initial test pilots or guinea pigs for this effort. So it was great in that, we got a lot of attention and had access to, cloud services or cloud, infrastructure. But on the challenging side of it, we were very limited on what they would allow us to use. So we were essentially restricted to some really basic services, VMs, load balancer, and a little bit after was the storage accounts, Azure storage accounts. So a lot of learning and a little bit of rework there and they got comfortable with their infrastructure and standards and imaging and things like that. But we were able to come up with a design. The nice thing with Mattermost, the reference architecture that's out there is great, but there's Mattermost is really flexible in the way you can deploy it. So there's lots of different solutions given any organization's sort of constraints there. So as we built out the initial system, we started with guidelines that Mattermost publishes for hardware and also based on some of our experience. And then we set up some load testing to essentially, validate and set some baselines for that infrastructure. And what we essentially did was set it up so that we were going to do 2x the anticipated volume and load that we would expect in the next 6 to 12 months. And we tried to essentially do that with sub-second response times. So that allowed us to get the baseline. And then from there, I can't stress again how important performance monitoring is, but we set that up, and that was going to be sort of our guidelines on as we onboarded teams, we would watch performance, and if things started to get stressed, we knew we had to add resources and where. There's also the aspect of the way people actually use it may be a little different than the way the load tests are actually stressing the system. So performance monitoring is an absolute must. And it's really been great for us in terms of maintaining system performance as users on board. And then lastly, I think we made a conscious effort in the beginning, and again, I think this is a good approach, is just keep the complexity as low as you can. So again, Mattermost can scale out in many different ways. We tried to keep it as simple as we could and only introduce complexity when and where we needed it. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. So this is the design that we ended up with. So I kind of walked through this a little bit. It looks very similar to, I think, your standard, 3-tier architecture, and again, very, very similar to the reference architecture that's on the Mattermost documentation. We've got mobile devices and desktops coming through a corporate VPN. We've basically put an Azure load balancer in the front of that. Because we, as the Mattermost operations team, didn't have full control over the load balancer, and for some other reasons, we introduced an Nginx web proxy layer. We had some special logging requirements and some other redirect features that we added. So the Nginx layer gave us control over being able to pull hosts in and out of load balancers, and also add some extra flexibility and configuration there. We've got essentially 3 nodes in the web tier, 3 nodes in the app tier for Mattermost, and then 3 nodes on the app tier for the push proxy. The way this organization was set up was basically, we have 3 different compartments. So the web tier is isolated from the app tier, and that's isolated from the data tier. And they all sit within a single virtual network within Azure. The reason why we chose 3, two is certainly sufficient in many cases. We like to use 3 just from I think a better high availability aspect. It allows us to take a node out of the system and still have redundant nodes in there. If one happens to fail, we've got 2 backups, and then we can essentially have those machines a little bit smaller than necessary and spread that load across 3. On the app tier push proxy side, we started out with a much smaller push proxy, but noticed that we had some extra capacity there. We scaled it up, and we've introduced a file preview component, which is Gothenburg. We co-host that with the push proxy on those servers. So we've sort of beefed up those machines, and we run those there as well. And then on the data tier, this is one of the things where we would have loved to use Azure's Postgres service, but again, wasn't available. So we started with a very simple master database, master slave topology there. We looked at doing sort of a clustered approach, but again, back to the complexity goal, we basically felt it wasn't necessary. It's proven to be very, very stable so far. And I think I'll talk about it a little bit in the future, but what's next in that regard. On the storage account side, so as many of you may know, Mattermost supports really 2 types of storage for files. So you can use an S3 compatible service like S3 or Mini IO, or a network drive. Because there wasn't any NAS available at this point in time, we looked at setting up a mini IO cluster, but also tried and tested out the Azure Storage Account. And we just basically mount that as a CIFS mount, which is a dialect of SMB, or Samba mount, and that seemed to work great for us. So that's been running very well. And if we do run an initiative, that maybe we'll look at something like mini IO. On the monitoring side, we've introduced really three different monitoring tools, essentially: Prometheus and Grafana, which I think is the gold standard in terms of Mattermost monitoring. We've also hooked Prometheus exporters on all the nodes and the database as well. So we have that to track all performance. We've also introduced Zabbix, another monitoring layer. It's a little bit of a corporate standard. So there's other teams that also look at that. And so we're exporting metrics and monitoring to Zabbix. And most recently, we introduced Splunk for log aggregation and analysis. So we've got those three, and they've proven extremely useful. In terms of VM sizing, Nginx, we went with a little bit smaller size machines, 2 by 8s essentially. On the Mattermost app side, again, one of the interesting requirements here is probably unique versus some of the other engagements that I've been involved with, is that they wanted to support 1.5 gigabyte uploaded files. So to do that, we had to go a little bit higher on the memory profile. So we're using 4 by 32s there. And then on the push proxy, as I mentioned, with Gutenberg and the sort of the memory intensive nature of that, we've gone a little bit higher with 4 by 32s as well. And then the database following suit with the same level machines. So automation, we started out on this adventure doing everything manually. There was really no automation tools that were in place at this organization. Given the nature of their learning curve on Azure and just changes in the infrastructure, we ended up having to sort of rebuild the infrastructure several times, at least parts of it manually. And while that was fine, it was certainly labor intensive and a little susceptible to human error. About halfway through, I think maybe the second or third build, we decided to kind of push Ansible as a configuration management tool, keep all of our infrastructure in source control as infrastructure as code, and automate the entire system. That has been immensely valuable. Again, I think almost table stakes for us at this point. Get the humans out of touching the system, get it on code. We treat it like, we treat a release like any other release. We will, everything's versioned, everything is labeled on release, so we know exactly what's been deployed and, all the configuration that's in place. So it's been, great for efficiency, consistency, and has reduced a ton of, errors along the way. And then on the, so another interesting aspect to this particular engagement, the client wanted to have customized mobile apps. And since we had multiple internal environments, in production and stage, and then slightly different variants of mobile tools for, managed devices and BYOD devices, we decided to put an automated build process in place so that we could take the standard Mattermost build, sort of overlay or introduce our customizations, run it through a CI/CD process, and basically create these 10 different variants of the mobile app. So we used everything sourced in GitHub. We use Azure pipelines. We've actually connected a remote Mac OS machine to do the builds. The capabilities of Azure at the time didn't allow us to do the builds on the on their Mac machines the way we wanted to. So we've got our own sort of build farm that sits outside, but it's actually connected to Azure pipeline. Whenever there's a new release on Mattermost, we kick off a new build of the custom apps. Once the artifacts are produced, the APKs and IPAs, we send them to a now secure service. it's a really great service that does sort of automated security testing and scanning on the mobile apps. It's, basically generates a report that the team reviews just to make sure that there's, nothing strange that's been introduced either, from the Mattermost mobile code base or through any of the changes that we've made. At the same time, we also produce those artifacts. We check them into a release in GitHub, and then those are made available to the team to deploy via AirWatch, enterprise mobile management tool, when desired. So it's a really good process. We're able to generate these custom mobile apps with very little effort, and it's been extremely valuable for us. And then so what we've found over time is that there's a early stage of adoption of Mattermost where organizations just get used to the messaging part of it, and getting familiar with teams and channels and all the great stuff they can do. But once they're comfortable with those basics, they sort of quickly look at how do we get more more of our workflow built into this tool. So the conversation goes from how do I do this in Mattermost to how do we get this integrated. So over the last year and a half or so, we've introduced about 16 different plugins and rolled those out to the organization, 8 of which we've custom developed. Some of the plugins help with compliance. Some of them are help with sort of administrative tasks. We have a tips and tricks bot that aids in training and allows for the organization to micro inform users on a daily basis. And we've got some plugins that help support sort of centralized control across many teams and channels. So in addition to some of the great Mattermost marketplace plugins that already exist, like Jira and GitHub, Jenkins, and a few others. And again, in the beginning, when we talked about some of the compliance requirements, there was just a set of features that the compliance team needed. Fortunately, the plugin framework that Mattermost provides gave us a lot of flexibility to add some additional features that were really geared towards compliance requirements, and that one helped early on check those boxes and make sure they were comfortable with the broader rollout. So it's a fantastic framework, and it really gives you the ability to sort of make Mattermost your own. And I do believe it really unlocks the real value for organizations once they get to that stage. So what's next? That journey took over maybe about a year and a half, and as things developed, we've been looking at new opportunities in terms of scaling and taking advantage of some of the additional Azure services that are now available for the organization, as well as some of these great new features that Mattermost is releasing or has released. So one of the I guess big things that we're looking excited about is moving towards Azure database for Postgres. It just gets us out of the business of managing the machines and gives us sort of distributed scale. So that's on the horizon, as well as moving to Elasticsearch. We're getting pretty up there in terms of posts within the database, and I think we're getting to a point where not only would we benefit from the performance of Elasticsearch, but some of the additional search capabilities there. So we're excited about that. And then looking at containerization and auto scaling. So one thing that at least we've seen is that usage of Mattermost sort of has peaks and valleys. And then in an effort to manage sort of cost and give us a lot more flexibility in terms of scaling for peak load, we'd love to explore, either Azure Kubernetes Service or, Azure container services there. So that's on the horizon. And then from a Mattermost feature perspective, the LDAP group sync is really a big win for this organization. As I mentioned, we've got a lot of sort of tooling process in place to onboard users and assign them the right teams and channels. LDAP Group Sync really gets us away from all of that and gives us a much better way to manage that membership. Guest accounts is another great feature for us. We've got contractors within the organization that would love to be involved in Mattermost, but they have to have far more restricted access. So we're excited to be able to roll that out to several of the teams. And then lastly, the DevOps Command Center. One of the largest users within this organization is the DevOps team and the development organization. And some of the really neat features that are part of this, and really the philosophy behind it, I think is something that really resonates with the team. So that's something that's on our roadmap for this year as well. And thank you very much. That's our experience so far. It's been a great journey. We've learned a lot. I'm happy to share some of this with you. And there's several other areas where we can kind of go deep and maybe a follow-up webinar as well. So thank you all very much. And thank you to Ian and team for inviting us in.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Right.
Maybe just a couple of, why don't you try a couple follow-up questions, just because if you're up for it.
Yeah.
One is, I'd love to hear a little bit more about sort of plugins, maybe whether it's this organization or in general. What are some of the custom plugins, maybe not whether it's specifics or more categories, right? What are things that can really improve in these very high security environments productivity? What are some of the plugins that you thought were like, wow, that's really effective. That's really going to help a lot of people.
That's a great question. So for this organization, I think the plugins that at least that we've put in place that have been highly adopted. So we implemented a plugin for OneDrive to allow file access within the system. A lot of the team uses the Jira set of tools. So Confluence and Jira, in addition to GitHub, and just having all of that communication and notifications and kind of inside channels and teams where folks are spending most of their day. That's been hugely valuable. And then from alerting, a lot of teams hook in their different monitoring systems. So whether it's Zabbix or Nagios, these teams are responsible for managing production environments. So being able to hook in their notifications, being able to get them into a channel, if there's an incident, having teams to be able to jump in, maybe even create a new channel and address the incident, and then be able to close it, but also have an archive record of what was done. This is again something that now with the new sort of DevOps Command Center, we can automate a lot of that, where it took a lot of manual intervention. But I think that's another great aspect. In addition to some of the compliance tools, so we've had to implement some checks on when folks upload files. They need to certify that those files don't have sensitive information in it. In addition, we've introduced a sort of an antivirus scan as well. So every file that gets uploaded gets passed through an antivirus scanner, and if there's anything found, it gets rejected. And then lastly, we've also introduced a moderation and report abuse tool. So essentially, if a user sees or witnesses some behavior that is questionable, they can report that to a moderator. The moderator will get notified, then can decide if he wants to take down the post and intervene at that point. So that's been another one that fortunately we haven't had to use too much, but enough to where it's proven itself and its value. So
got it. And maybe one last question, just like in terms of, we have a lot of customers that are they really need a self-hosted system, something with network security. And you can touch on it a little bit in terms of you have contractors and you have different people at different statuses. And this theme of access restrictions is something we see in some of our high trust customers, the folks that really need to have specificity in what people can do. You touched on a little bit. Have you seen anything that is sort of a pattern around that theme of access control, whether network level, channel level, disclosure level?
Yeah. So, I think, and I think I left some of this out in terms of the overall presentation just for simplicity. But within this organization, there's actually two separate instances of Mattermost. One for a much higher security, work stream, and that comes with different access controls and certain people that have access to that. And there's a secondary instance which has a lot of security aspects, but is less sensitive in terms of the nature of the business and who has access to it. We use SAML for all our authentication, so all users have to be provisioned within the organization. If they're taken out of the organization, obviously that they're restricted from their Mattermost access. Our onboarding tool, again, goes through a set of workflows where they are, basically validated that they have permission for the teams and channels that they have access to. So they only get provision for those, and only, for channel admins and team admins, select individuals have access to those. So they are, responsible for managing access, and are accountable for not allowing the wrong folks access to those systems or those channels.
Excellent. We've definitely seen that in the most sophisticated deployments, a lot of those patterns. Mike, thank you so much for being a partner, for helping our customers, for being part of our community. This was a fantastic talk, and really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have been part of it, and our relationship together over the last few years. So we're very grateful and excited for the future.